Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
It is Friday, although you may be listening over the weekend on progressivevoices.com, the on-demand tab, or throughout the weekend, so happy weekend to you. Thank you for listening on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast, or at ProgressiveVoices.com. Later in the show, Dom Kelly joins me from the New Disabled South. Can't wait to talk to him about a variety of topics, not just the plight of the disabled here in the south part of the United States, but he's also a young Jewish person who has been outspoken in his opposition to the aggression by Israel in Gaza. Going to be a fascinating conversation. Can't wait to have that with him. First things first, let's get to some headlines that dropped. For this, we go to WXIA-TV. That would be 11 Alive.
Soon, we are staying on top of breaking news. After months of questions, we now have an answer in the disqualification controversy surrounding Fulton County DA Fani Willis. In a 23-page ruling, Judge Scott McAfee said Willis can remain on the election interference case against former President Donald Trump and his co-defendants, but only if Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade steps down. Investigative reporter Zach Merchant has been following this case since it first started a couple of months ago. And now joining us, Zach, what's your key takeaway here?
The big takeaway is that District Attorney Fani Willis has a big choice to make. Judge McAfee told her in his order this morning that if Wade stays, her whole office, including Nathan Wade, will be removed from the case. If Wade steps aside, Willis will be allowed to continue to prosecute the case along with the other line prosecutors in her office. The pair, who shared a romantic relationship, were accused by defense attorneys of improperly financially benefiting from the case, creating a conflict of interest that damaged their ability to impartially prosecute it. But Judge McAfee ruled against that argument, finding that any financial gain flowing from the DA's office to Nathan Wade and his role as hired special prosecutor was, quote, not a factor on the part of the district attorney to indict and prosecute this case. However, the judge also wrote that the relationship, the contract, and testimony provided at earlier hearings, quote, established that the district attorney's prosecution is encumbered by an appearance of impropriety. Robert James, a former DeKalb County district attorney, said Judge McAfee's decision highlights those concerns.
The judge saying, look, I don't think that there's any evidence that anything really bad went on here, inappropriate maybe, but not bad in the legal sense. But it doesn't look right, and you can cure it by getting him off the case and move forward.
Bingo.
So now DA Willis needs to decide who goes, Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade or her entire office.
That news breaking early Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the letter of resignation had been submitted by Nathan Wade to remove himself as special prosecutor. For comment from the Trump's attorney team, let's go back to WXIA-TV. They did get a statement that they wanted to read.
And we are hearing from former President Donald Trump's attorney on this decision. Steve Sadow issued a statement earlier saying, quote, while respecting the court's decision, we believe that the court did not afford appropriate significance to the prosecutorial misconduct of Willis and Wade. We will use all legal options available as we continue to fight to end this case, which should never have been brought in the first place.
Now, I've already heard from folks on the right that they are going to attempt to appeal this decision. But the funny thing is, in order to get the appeal, they have to ask Judge Scott McAfee for a certificate of immediate review. If he gives them that, they can appeal this all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court, which could take up to a year if Judge Scott McAfee awards that certificate of immediate review. While Fani Willis did dodge a bullet, she did not dodge Scott McAfee's scathing rhetoric. The established record now highlights a significant appearance of impropriety that infects the current structure of the prosecution team, he said. Ouch. This finding is by no means an indication that the court condones this tremendous lapse in judgment or the unprofessional manner of the district attorney's testimony during the evidentiary hearing, he said. All right, for a little background on the show, however, I usually produce the weekend show on Friday morning, as I do most Monday through Friday shows, before the 9 to 10 a.m. hour, or actually into the 9 o'clock hour as the show starts airing at 9 a.m. It airs 9 to 10 weekdays on the America One Radio app at AmericaOneRadio.com. So I already had today's show pretty much done, and here is the rest of it before that news dropped. WXIA-TV 11 Alive giving us this.
A bill to create vouchers for public school students in Georgia took a major step toward becoming law today. Good evening, and thanks for being with us. I'm Jennifer Bellamy.
And I'm Jonathan Martin, in tonight for Faith Jesse. So this passed the State House with a 1-vote margin. 11 Alive's Doug Richards live at the Capitol with more on what this means.
All right, now, fellow Lib, before I let him do that, I want you to pay attention to some of the concessions that had to be made to get this bill passed. Not all losses are complete losses. Take a listen.
Yeah, this is one of those interesting bills where not all Democrats were on one side and not all Republicans were on another side. It was very similar to a bill that barely failed last year, but backers gave it another go this year, and today they got their approval in the House.
You got this quality, spectacular 39-page bill in front of you.
That is the humble House Representative Matt Reeves, by the way.
It was mostly Republicans who touted the school voucher bill. It creates payments of up to $6,500 for private school tuition for families with students in the bottom 25% of Georgia public schools. It prioritizes vouchers for families earning less than $120,000 a year. Backers say such school choice would incentivize poorer performing schools to do better.
I want the child that is in the most difficult school system to receive the fantastic education that my child receives back home at Blackburn Elementary School.
That is Representative Will Wade, who hails from Lumpkin County, where per student spending is around $14,377 per student. For comparison, Fulton County, it's $12,890. DeKalb County, $13,834. Much less per student than Lumpkin County is able to do. Bearing in mind that labor and utility and transportation costs in major cities are going to be way more for any school system. Oh, and unfortunately, security as well.
But critics of the bill worried it would shuffle school funding at the expense of schools that need resources most.
Funding is based on the number of children in the desk. And if the desks are empty because children have gone somewhere else using this voucher, there will be less money for schools.
That is Representative Debbie Buckner from Columbus.
Backers of the bill said it would actually increase education funding with teacher raises, even if there are fewer public school students.
Change is scary in education, but the same old thing can also be scary.
Again, Representative Matt Reeves chiming in.
The bill barely passed the House, to the chagrin of a teachers union leader in the hallway.
I think it's a sad day for our public school students because, once again, we are giving choice to private schools and not providing resources for our students in our under-resourced public schools.
That's Lisa Morgan. She is the president of the Georgia Association of Educators, by the way. Okay, so the House version of the bill did pass, again, by a 1-vote margin, and because there were amendments added to the bill, it has to go back to the Georgia Senate, which only has 5 more working days, if one of them is today, through next week, to pass the amended version, to even see it reach the governor's desk. The likelihood that that happens, pretty strong, not going to lie. But let's talk about some of the wins here. Again, the passage of this bill is not a win for public school advocates, but there were some amendments added that sort of whittle away and de-teeth this voucher bill, although the slippery slope argument says that this is just a cracking of the door. So any K-12 student zoned for a public school scoring in the bottom 25% of state performance measures, that school, by the way, needing more school funding, obviously, could transfer to a private school and request $6,500 to help defray the cost. That is also, by the way, only for households earning $120,000 or less per year in that school zone, that public schools zone that scores in the bottom 25% of state performance. Also, students would have to attend their intended public school for at least a year, although incoming kindergartners could bypass the requirements. Another issue, homeschooling actually is eligible. Why do I take issue with that? Well, if a household is earning $120,000 a year or somewhere in that area, north of $100,000 a year, that sounds to me like if someone's getting homeschooled, then you've got a single income household that obviously feels comfortable enough having a single income household so that the other parent can stay home to homeschool. That is something of a luxury. I think we can all agree. There's also no guarantee that $6,500 in a voucher is actually going to cover the entire cost of a private school's tuition, and private schools are not bound to keep their cap at that level to offer any sort of inducements financially to meet the cap for students of parents who couldn't afford to pay a dime more than $6,500. Also, let's point out the amendments that didn't pass that actually would have made sense for this bill. Here's my last segment yesterday, or at least a portion of it. And one thing that I really wanted to hone in on was when Representative Lydia Glaze wanted to present a friendly amendment that would require a private school to receive all kids that apply if they take public funding.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just have one friendly amendment that I'd love for you to consider. For private schools, can we adopt something that says that when private schools accept public funds for students to come to their school, that we can assure that all of these kids will have eligibility and be accepted into the schools?
I mean, why not?
So you're recommending that if a private school accepts any public funding for their students, that they would have to be, they would have to accept all students. I assume you're suggesting like through a lottery or something.
No, actually, what I am saying is that if a student takes the Promise Scholarship and goes to a private school in their county, close to them, their parents deem that this is their choice, and the school is willing to accept the funding, can we agree, or can this bill address the fact that that student would get accepted into that school?
Well, you're welcome to make that offer of an amendment, but but I would personally not vote for it as a member of the committee, because that would be out of keeping with how we have rules and regs and how we have adopted other public funding going to private institutions, including Hope Scholarship. I don't think for a student, a Georgia student who uses the Hope Scholarship to attend Emory University, that we require Emory University to accept any student that wants to go there.
Well, I think that's apples and oranges. We're talking about kids trying to get a K through 12 public education or private education with their parents' choice, and if they move from public because it's failing, or they have a choice and they're trying to get to a better school and are not allowed to be able to go to that school, then there still is some barriers, and I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out, and if you have a way to help those students and those parents really take advantage of the choice, I thought maybe that might be a friendly amendment.
And by the way, she's speaking with Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, a Republican who is, of course, shilling for the SB 233, this school voucher bill. Man, Lydia Glaze really made a salient point. And this argument that, well, if a college student who's on Hope Scholarship lives blocks from Emory University, does that mean Emory University has to accept them? Yes, apples and oranges. Thank you, Lydia Glaze, for saying that. What a bullshit argument that is. I'm sorry. Attending a college or university versus attending a public or private, taking public funding money, when K through 12 education is something that from our frontier days, essentially, we have been looking to guarantee every child, regardless of income, regardless of whatever social stature you wish to. It's apples and oranges. Emory University, any college or university, has educational standards that they have to adhere to, specifically based on their curriculum needs. You can't compare using the Hope Scholarship to colleges and universities to a K through 12 education. Oh my gosh. Can I just tell you, by the way, that for all the talk the Republicans have had about growing opportunity for kids to attend the school that best suits them or best aids them in their process of getting that quality K through 12 education, this friendly, by the way, had to be railed over by the Legislative Council on the amendment. How about that? The Legislative Council had to weigh in as to whether or not every child, once SB 233 becomes law, has access to this voucher program, would then get accepted by the private school nearest them if that's the school that they so chose to attend. And oh, by the way, that amendment failed. As did, by the way, another amendment that to me is just breathtaking. Doreen Carter wanted to seek an amendment that would insist that teachers in private schools be certified. I mean, the whole point of the private school voucher program is to ensure that students in failing schools can go to a private school that provides a better opportunity and education for them. You would think that the private schools would only hire teachers that are certified. That amendment as well failed. Author David Pepper, author of the book Saving Democracy, a user's manual with a timely whiteboard yesterday I wanted to share right now.
Okay, everybody. The numbers keep coming in as to these universal voucher programs in states like Ohio, where there's no longer any restrictions to the use of public dollars for a private school voucher. And the numbers are exploding, as you'd expect, but I'd say even worse than any of us would expect, especially when the original sales pitch was this is to help poor kids in urban areas find a better school. Let's go through this real quick. Cleveland.com did a really interesting story looking through the numbers in Cuyahoga County, which is greater Cleveland. They're really stunning. So what they found was, of course, an explosion in vouchers. When you're giving something away with no restrictions, people are going to take advantage of that, from 2,500 to 9,200, so a real explosion. But it was who and where these vouchers were used that really tells the story. So Rocky River, a suburban community, saw its private voucher use go from 16 to 309. Bay Village, 13 to 229. Lakewood, 49 to 438. Strongsville went from 61 private vouchers just about a year ago to 791. So exploding, right? Well, then Cleveland.com took a look at, okay, what happened to the public school population in these communities that are seeing the explosion of vouchers? And this is the really interesting part of the story. The population of the public schools hardly declined at all. Rocky River only down 22, even though it went from 16 to 309. Bay Village, 13 to 229, only 30 fewer students in the public schools. Only 2 fewer in Lakewood, even though it went up by almost 400. And even though this went up by almost 700 in Strongsville, the private voucher usage, that school actually saw a 17 student increase in the public schools. What's happening? What's happening is that people aren't leaving the public schools generally to get these vouchers. This increase is almost entirely, clearly, people who are already going to private schools. Mm-hmm. And this is simply subsidizing the tuition they were already paying to go to the private schools. This is happening in Columbus and Cincinnati, the suburbs of these cities, and Akron predominantly, many of which the most wealthy communities in Ohio are the ones with the greatest amount of increase in private vouchers. And that reflects broader data. 66% of voucher use, people who are already in private schools, only 15% low income. 9 out of 10 new vouchers are going to people who could already afford the private school.
Dom Kelly joins us. He is co-founder, CEO of the New Disabled South. That is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And the New Disabled South Rising, a 501c4 arm. And you, in your capacity at New Disabled South and New Disabled South Rising, work hard to advocate for those who are dealing with challenges that they didn't ask for, but have to contend with throughout life. By the way, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate that. I want to get your thoughts, first of all, on some of the things that have been making its way through the General Assembly. We've seen House Bill 1105. We've seen, we just talked about SB 233. Do you want to talk about the school voucher bill first and what sort of impacts that can have on students, at-risk students that you advocate for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. The school voucher bill is another one of those bills that seems to just do more harm to students than good. Unfortunately, we have seen basically a defunding of public education in the state for many years, and this is another example of millions, tens of millions of dollars that is going to be taken away from improving our public schools. And a lot of people don't think about the impact that vouchers have on students with disabilities, but it really takes away we probably hear a lot about choice when we talk about voucher bills. Like, we want to be able to choose where our child goes to school, but for most parents of kids with disabilities, they don't have a choice. Private schools do not legally have to provide accommodations to their students. So there is no legal federal protection under the law for any disabled student who goes to a private school. They can be discriminated against without repercussions. And oftentimes those vouchers, if they do go to a child with a disability, they face a number of barriers besides the financial barriers to still being able to get into a private school. And we know that even though we do have legal protections for students in this country, there are still so many issues with public schools and so many issues of students facing all sorts of barriers, physical access barriers, barriers to learning. And if they invested more money in public schools, we would probably see less barriers. So it's really unfortunate that that instead of doing that, they're investing their money into these voucher programs, which really incentivize parents with non-disabled students to be able to go to these expensive schools and really make it harder for the students with disabilities to have access to education.
That's why it was important to me when Representative Lydia Glaze wanted to offer a friendly amendment to insist that private schools that are going to take vouchers from a public school student's family in one of these, lower 25% rated schools in the state, that they have to accept someone. And that, to me, the fact that that amendment failed was the out that I think a private school would be able to deny a student with some exceptional needs, such as a disability, learning or physical.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's it. Yeah, it's a little concerning for me as well. I was when I listened to that amendment, at first I thought, well, this is just a way to cull based on race or gender identity. But as you and I started talking, I thought, well, that's actually another way for them to say, we don't have the capacity to deal with a student with exceptional needs as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
HB 1105. I'm curious if you have an opinion on that from a state of mind from someone who represents the New Disabled South.
Yeah, I think we advocate for any and everybody with a disability, and that includes immigrants in this country. And unfortunately, we have a culture in our society of labeling people as illegal. I fundamentally do not believe that anybody is illegal.
Right.
And unfortunately, this kind of what I think is just political. It is to rile up a base. I don't think it does anything. It certainly does not do anything to keep people safe. It's going to harm. It's going to harm a lot of people who may or may not be undocumented, and it's a reaction to a really awful, terrible killing that was committed. But it's certainly not going to prevent situations like that in the future, and it is going to increase, I believe, the hate that we see in this country. It is going to increase anti-immigrant rhetoric. It is a dangerous bill. It's a dangerous precedent to set, and I think it's offensive to politicize the murder of a young person. And so, and I always say, like, every issue is a disability issue. So it doesn't matter if it's explicitly, disability or not. This is, there are plenty of disabled folks who are immigrants in this country, undocumented or documented. And so, yeah, I think this is just a political thing for Republicans. It is. I don't think they have any intention of keeping people safe. That is my opinion.
Yeah. Well, also, I think this brings up a point that you've been talking about on social media a little bit when it comes to selective exploitation, if I could coin that phrase. I'm going to take a quick break because I've got a hard break here to catch, but we're going to catch back up with that. In fact, let's pick up on that. The name Ryan Gaynor comes to mind, and I want you to elaborate on that in just a little bit. We're with Dom Kelly from the New Disabled South on The Ron Show. Thank you for listening on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. Follow us at Ron Show ATL on your preferred social media platform.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Thank you for listening. We are with Dom Kelly from the New Disabled South Rising. Dom, we were talking a little bit, not specifically about the Laken Riley murder in Athens, Clarke County, but about the legislation that followed it subsequently, and the use of her name as a rallying cry, almost a political ploy. And then at the same time, her family shows up at a Trump rally, and it's all just as much a rubber stamping use of that as is possible. So what can you do there? Still sad if you ask me, but I want to ask you about the Ryan Gaynor story, because I used the term selective exploitation, and I feel like there's a selective exploitation when it comes to, using scenarios like Laken Riley's death to push for legislation with unintended consequences down the road, which we were talking about earlier. But give us the Ryan Gaynor story and why it's important that we know his name, that politicians say his name.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Ryan Gaynor story is unfortunately not a surprise because we have long lived in a country that has dehumanized Black lives, and of course, when you are at the intersection of a Black and disabled or neurodivergent, you face more risk of death, of injury from the system of policing. And I think the critical difference here is that this is a power structure. This is a system in this country, something that can be changed and moved by, and should be by, the people that we elect into power. We have a system of policing in this country that was built on racism, built on the dehumanization of Black people. And so, we see far more often Black people being murdered by the police. We see far more often Black people with intellectual disabilities, with mental illness, facing police violence and death. And so the Ryan Gaynor story is, this is a kid. This is a 15-year-old kid, and we should be. You would think we would. The people who are supposed to protect and serve us would know how to de-escalate a situation in which somebody with autism, a child with autism, is in crisis. And unfortunately, time and time again, we've seen that de-escalation that we hear so much about, and all of the training that we've heard about, since George Floyd and even before, has not done anything, because we continue to see the same thing again and again from those with enormous institutional power. And so I think that's the difference to me, and why it's critical for us to talk about Ryan Gaynor. And yeah, this wasn't we work in the South, and Ryan Gaynor is not in the South, but this is an issue that reverberates across the country. And we've got the largest prison populations here in the South. We've got the biggest instances of police violence against minority communities. Like, this is the reality of this region. And so when I hear about Ryan Gaynor, it's indicative of a larger problem in this country, and one that our elected officials need to do something about.
So let's let everybody in on that story a little bit. For those who don't know, California sheriff's deputies shot this 15-year-old teenager, Ryan Gaynor, who has autism, who was holding a gardening tool. He was holding a gardening tool. This, to me, comes back to the bastardization of the term defund the police, which is more about taking funds or creating more funds, bringing additional funding to law enforcement to hire professionals who can handle special needs, mental wellness, or mental challenging needs that police officers in their 6 to 16 weeks in police academies aren't going to come away with the tools to handle or know how to handle, because it takes years to go to school and get a degree to handle these sorts of things. And here we are in Atlanta building a sprawling police campus, and I've yet to hear one word about how we're going to add additional training for APD or other police departments who are going to come use this facility to handle mental challenges that they come in on when a call is made.
Yeah, and like let's be real too. Like we hear about implicit bias training, and like statistically and in studies, there is no data to back up that those types of trainings actually do anything to curb police violence. So there's no evidence of this, and for years now, when folks have been calling to defund the police and abolish the police, it's just become this politicized, really divisive rhetoric, when if everyone would sit down and understand what it means that we are completely tearing down a system that was built to operate this way, and thinking about safety holistically, investing in communities in a way that we don't in this country. And like, if we invested more in our disabled community, if we invested more in making sure people weren't living in poverty, and the list goes on, like, we would have much less quote unquote crime in this country. But we don't do that, and so it perpetuates the issue. I think that's one of the most frustrating things as we see this happen. And to me, this is preventable death. This is preventable. But we need the political will to actually do something that might seem radical to change the system.
1,000%. I've said all along, crime exists where opportunity doesn't, and that's not just in communities of poverty but also in communities that are disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
So let's pivot. We had our Georgia presidential primary on Tuesday. Question 1: did you vote, or did you go to vote?
I voted a blank ballot.
I did the same thing, and I was curious when the results were coming out if we were going to actually see the numbers. And I think they're estimating somewhere around 6,500 in the state of Georgia. Did the same as you and I. But I was actually surprised that, like, initially the Secretary of State's office did not tabulate those numbers until they were almost sort of forced to when folks were querying what that number looked like. Are you surprised by the number?
I'm pleasantly surprised by the number.
Yeah.
I actually, I wouldn't use surprised. I mean, I think people are tired. People are angry, and so I know a ton of people in at least my little bubble of people who are committed to voting blank ballots. So I knew we'd have a significant number. I think, like, the significance is that this was more than 50% of the margin by which Biden won in 2020. And I think that's really critical data that the White House, I know that they have seen this data, and I know that they were not happy about this data or any of the uncommitted campaigns that have happened in this country, because they're feeling the pressure. But people are saying, we're tired of this. We're tired of our money going to bombing, murdering people in Gaza, and so yeah, I was thrilled to see this. This is what democracy is about. This is a way for us to use our votes to help make change.
And I think you have to make 2 points here. Number one, it's harmless. Currently, it's harmless to do so. It's about sending up a warning flare, saying, "Hey, look, we're here, and this is what we intend to do if ... But also, we are seeing, I think, a hardening of tone from liberal Democrats in Washington with regard to Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's antics in Gaza. I mean, we've actually seen where this sort of advocacy actually seems to be stirring the pot a little bit, and seeing some. We saw Chuck Schumer, who, like you, is a Jewish American, who is standing up for those who have been suffering needlessly in Gaza, those who have died in Gaza. That's not nothing.
No, No, and I really believe that the uncommitted and blank ballot campaigns have moved the needle tremendously with I guess establishment Dems. And I was really happy to see Schumer kind of move on this. Surprised actually.
I was too. Yeah, I thought he went far beyond what I expected from a Chuck Schumer.
Me too. Yep. Me too.
So, as a Jewish American, I saw you talking a good deal about this on the Twitter X platform, the birthright trips, because I think this is an important thing to point out. There's this conception in the United States that Israel is this really, really super dangerous place, and this was the case even before October 7th. But a lot of Jewish American youths are going to Israel for birthright trips. Can you explain what those are and how continuing to go on these trips sort of signals the exact opposite of what the perception is?
Yeah, so Birthright is a program for young Jewish people. I think age range typically was like 18 to 26. I think they may have expanded the age a little bit, but when I went in 2012, actually 12 years ago this week, I was there for the first time. And it's a trip for Jewish youth to go to Israel for free. You have to have at least one Jewish grandparent in order to be eligible to go. And so you go on a 10-day trip. They take you all around Israel, and they give you the quote unquote history. And, there's a little bit of talk about conflict in the Middle East, but nothing substantial. And really it's a chance for a bunch of young Jews to get together and party and get to know each other. And the hope, and the stated goal is that, you will go back and have a connection to Israel. And I think at the end of the day, what they really want is for folks to make Aliyah, which is, me as a Jew, I can apply to make Aliyah and become a citizen of Israel, because of my birthright. I have a Jewish mother, and that is the hope, that is the goal, and it is very problematic. As a lot of Jews over the years who have done it have come back and started to learn more about the realities of what's happening in Palestine, or what's happened in Palestine, the real history. And, I went back on my own in an unstructured way a couple years after. And that was when I really, my eyes really opened to what actually is happening there. And I learned about the history and was able to kind of come out of, I wasn't really like fully indoctrinated into it. I really walked away feeling like I had a great trip and met great people, but didn't, wasn't planning to make Aliyah or anything like that. And really did educated myself and got a political education, and that is how I've landed where I have the last decade. But it is a trip that continues to stay. And right now there are trips leaving to Israel. There are young people going, and I see online all the time parents who are contemplating sending their kids, and people saying it is so safe, don't worry about it. And the reality is, yeah, it probably is pretty safe for them to go. It is probably pretty safe for people in Israel to live their normal lives. That is the truth. The country has soldiers all around. There are people with huge weapons walking around everywhere to protect Israeli people, to protect people who are traveling there. They've got the dome, they've got all this stuff in place, and yeah, you mostly don't have to worry when you're in Israel. And it really is pretty damning from my perspective to be able to say that and send young diaspora Jews like myself to Israel at the same time that Gaza is being completely wiped off the map and bloodlines are being destroyed. So I think it just says a lot about the realities of being there on the ground, and the kind of juxtaposition of this narrative that I hear in mainstream Jewish spaces and I heard my whole life, which is, the Israeli people are unsafe right now because of their neighbors, and Israel is the only safe place for Jews. It doesn't really make sense to me.
But you could also argue that it's the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF in Gaza that actually makes Jewish people less safe in Israel. Never in human history has being this violent and this oppressive to another culture of humanity ever made that bullying culture safe.
Yeah, it hasn't, and I think the other thing that the state of Israel's done is they have used Judaism, they have used Jewish symbols to associate the nation state with Judaism. So when people think about Judaism, they think about Israel. And so when someone says something against Israel, suddenly it's anti-Semitic. And that makes Jews far less safe around the world because it cheapens anti-Semitism. The ADL has cheapened anti-Semitism. Netanyahu and AIPAC, they have all, that is a strategy that they have utilized. And now it's why we have seen more anti-Semitism in recent years, because it's empowered actual anti-Semites to be outward about their anti-Semitism in ways that they weren't, and unfortunately, we just continue to see this equating of any anti-Israel sentiment with Jew hate, which is just not true.
More of my conversation with co-founder and CEO of New Disabled South Rising, Dom Kelly, when the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. We're with Dom Kelly, who is a Jewish American millennial, CEO, co-founder of the New Disabled South. I wanted to ask you, it seems as if that younger Jewish Americans seem to have a totally different take on Israel's policy towards Gaza and the West Bank. Let's not forget the West Bank. There's been activity in the West Bank as well, versus maybe older generations of Jewish Americans. Does this cause any sort of strife between the generations, and do you feel any of this even within your family?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just fully transparent. Just 2 days ago, I had to tell my grandmother we couldn't talk about this anymore because she is deeply, deeply hurt and disappointed by the stance that I took. And this is someone I love. This is someone who, by her own account, by her own admission, is a liberal. She is a staunch Biden voter. She is a staunch, Democrat, lifelong Democrat, and cares about every issue and is so unmovable when it comes to Israel. And that is very, very common. There is a generational thing. A lot of it has to do with trauma from the Holocaust. And that's a reality. And so I know that I can be both really solid in my views and my position and come to a conversation with my grandmother from a place of empathy, because I understand she was born into a time when Jews were, being genocided in Europe, and that's the reality. And so there is, and I had to set that hard line recently, and that's really, really a thing. There is a big generational divide that I don't know how we move past, and there's a lot of conversation about that in Jewish spaces right now.
Interestingly enough, we had the Oscars last weekend, and Jonathan Glazer's speech after winning an Academy Award. Zone of Interest, by the way, is a fantastic and gripping movie if you haven't seen that yet.
Now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October the 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all are victims of this dehumanization.
There's been a little bit, I think, a distortion of what his message was.
I think it's been an intentional distortion of his message by hard right-wing mainstream Jewish actors, Jewish organizations, who took a portion of what he said and made it appear that he was refuting his Jewishness in protest of what was happening in Gaza, which is not what he said. And unfortunately, that's just been intentionally, I think, twisted. And I don't know that it's the majority, but I would guess close to the majority at this point are fully in line with what he said, which is we don't stand with this. And so, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that something so, I think, courageous for him to use that moment, a moment that he very well might never get again, to stand on stage. Nobody else did. Not a single other person in that room did.
That's right.
To say, me as a Jew, I cannot stand by and allow the state of Israel to use who I am to justify a genocide.
So in your role as the co-founder and CEO of the New Disabled South, the New Disabled South Rising, you understand the political realities that Democrats and the President Biden and Harris administration are faced with. It's a situation where there has to be some equivocation because the Jewish American vote is a pretty supportive group for Democrats and has been historically for quite a while. And yet there's almost, it seems as if there's this tentative nature with Biden's actions to speak on behalf of the innocents in Gaza for fear of losing the Jewish American vote. Do you feel that too? I mean, it's like I kind of want to do the right thing, but I feel like I can't do enough of the right thing because I'm going to ward off this vote. But there are actually already, again, as we talked about, younger Jewish millennial voters are speaking out. Arab American voters are speaking out. The Michigan vote totals come November could be razor thin margins already as it is. And do you see the political reality that the president and the vice president are faced with on this issue?
I see the position that they believe that they are in, but I think it's misguided. Polling shows a vast majority of Democrats are asking for Biden to be firm on a permanent, lasting ceasefire. And the reality too is that Jews are not a monolith. So while the AIPACs and the ADLs have a lot of power and influence, they do not represent most of the Jews that I know, who at this point, even if early on they were not for a ceasefire because of what happened on October 7th,
Right.
I would say most that I know now are really wanting this to stop. And so the fact that he's still not there, I think he's done some things because of pressure, and setting up the port, I think, was pressure, but I don't think it's even close to being enough. And so, yeah, I think it's misguided. I think I'm tired of politicians not having the basic decency of doing the right thing. Okay, maybe there will be political repercussions to doing the right thing, but I think that is where courage comes in. You do the right thing because you have to, not because you're afraid of losing power. We need more political courage in this country, and I wish he would, and I wish he would listen to the vast majority of his base, including many Jewish voters like myself who are asking for a permanent, lasting ceasefire.
Last question. Do you think it would help if Hamas would just release the hostages?
I think Hamas can't release the hostages if there's not a ceasefire, and Israel has rejected ceasefire agreements. If we have a ceasefire, the hostages will be released, but we need to release all hostages. That includes the people who have been taken prisoner and hostage in Israel. So, yeah, I think that absolutely the hostages need to be released, and that will happen with a ceasefire.
Dom Kelly, CEO, co-founder, New Disabled South Rising. Great conversation today. I'm glad we got to catch up. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you for joining the Ron Show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Recapping the day and essentially the week's top stories we headed into the weekend, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee decided that one of you has got to go. It's either Fani Willis or Nathan Wade in the Fulton District Attorney case to prosecute Donald Trump and his co-conspirators in the Georgia election fraud case. In doing so, he excoriated Fani Willis for her antics, both in testimony at the Martin Luther King Day church speech, although he dismissed that as being anywhere near tampering with potential seating of a grand jury. He used terms like tremendous lapse in judgment and smell of mendacity, whatever mendacity smells like, in finger-wagging at Fani Willis and at Nathan Wade for their lapse in judgment. But with regard to the case itself, only one can continue to serve in the prosecution of this case, and thus Nathan Wade made the wise decision, because if Fani Willis had to step down, the entire district attorney's office had to step down, and it's essentially a reset from day one, and I guess Judge McAfee sees the need for prudence. However, of course, the Trump team will seek to appeal. He, Scott McAfee, holds the key, whether or not he grants them a certificate of immediate review to even allow the appeal. I guess that's the next shoe to drop, and we'll wait for that. All right, thank you for listening. This has been The Ron Show at ProgressiveVoices.com. 5 days a week, we're there on the On-Demand tab as well if you'd like to listen, and we air 9 to 10 a.m. weekdays, replay 5 to 6 p.m. weekdays at AmericaOneRadio.com or at the America One Radio app. Have a great weekend.